Good morning. My name is Shimon Ohayon, and I'm the director of the Dahan Center at Bar-Ilan University. Good morning and welcome to the International Conference, Jews of Portugal and the Spanish Portuguese Jewish Diaspora. Honorable guest, Professor Amnon Albeck, Vice-rector of Bar-Ilan University, Professor Miguel Tamen, Dean of the School of Arts and Humanities, Professor António Ventura, Director of the History Department, University of Lisbon, Professor Shimon Sharvit. You should be with us. Come, please. Your name is there. Okay. Bevakasha, I'm sorry. Professor Shimon Sharvit, rector of the Ashkelon Academic College in Israel. I'll mention also both the co-chairman of this conference, Professor José Alberto Tamen, and Professor Moshe Orfali, and Professor Yoshua El Colombre, who is the chairman of the academic committee of the Dahan Center. And of course, all the distinguished lecturers at this conference who came from all over the world to contribute to this important conference. Dear students and all guests, this is one of the most academic, comprehensive conference that deals with the Jews in Portugal and the Spanish Portuguese diaspora. This is, of course, due to the effort and the collaboration between the Dahan Center from Bar-Ilan University, the Center of History at the University of Lisbon, the CITCM Center from the University of Porto, the Ashkelon Academic College, and the Ben Tzvi Institute for Research in Israel. This conference raises excitement and curiosity, not only in the academic world, but also in the general community, and especially, of course, in the Jewish community all over the world. After all, here in the Iberian Peninsula, Portugal and Spain, there lived one of the largest part of the Jewish community in the world till 1492. Here, a rich culture was created in philosophy, literature, linguistics, music and poetry, Judaic studies, and more. Here, an economic and social life was created and well developed in a tremendous performance. These fruitful lives were cut down and destroyed due to the events of the Spanish Inquisition and the expulsion from Spain. As a result of the Spanish expulsion, 70,000 Jews immigrated to Portugal. This created, of course, the large community that was 2.5 times as big as the community that once lived in Portugal. But this community also sadly ended 5 years later with the expulsion from Portugal. Well, even though after the expulsion, the Spanish Portuguese diaspora kept their rich and unique culture that was built here in these countries. Only 2 weeks ago, we had the first concert at Bar-Ilan University of the new Ladino Orchestra under the direction of the doctorate student Ariel Lazarus, that he also will present at this conference his article. The large crowd that took part in this event is really a testimony of the longing and desire that people have for this unique combination of poetry and music. Their unique culture accompanied the Spanish Portuguese communities all over the world, from the Ottoman Empire to all around, Netherlands, England, Morocco, South America. Every place the expelled Jews came to, they became part of the elite of the Jewish community and the community at large. And of course, they became its leadership. They contributed to the development of the economic and social life of the communities they immigrated to. They also enhanced the religious and Jewish studies of the communities they enjoyed, of course, by their rich and diverse culture that they brought with them. And they became, as a matter of fact, the religious leadership at that time of all these communities. The whole Jewish world will never forget the big tragedy of the Spanish Portuguese community, the expulsions of hundreds of thousands of individuals and those that stayed in Spain and Portugal and were forced to convert. This conference is a very important opportunity to study and to clarify issues in the social historic research. And I'm sure with 30 sessions, no less than 30 sessions in this conference, that will give us a large platform to study these important issues. At the end of my words, I would like to thank all the institutes that were and are involved in building this conference, and especially the academic committee that organized the whole conference program step by step, session by session, lecture by lecture. And I want to start with Professor Moshe Orfali, Bar-Ilan University, who shared, of course, together with Professor Tamen as a chairman of the conference. I would like to thank Professor José Alberto Tamen, the University of Lisbon, Professor Elvira Mea, University of Porto, Professor Shimon Sharvit, Ashkelon Academic College, Professor Moshe Amar from the Ashkelon Academic College and Bar-Ilan University, Dr. Yoel Marciano, the Ben Tzvi Institute and Ariel University. And on behalf of all of us, I would like also to thank my staff at the Dahan Center and the staff here in the University of Lisbon that is working with Professor Tamen, that they spent so much time, day and night, for the success of this conference. I would like to thank Ms. Ora Kowalkowski on behalf of the Dahan Center. I would like to thank and to send regards. She's not here, but we have really to recognize her contribution to the conference, Ms. Yael Kaplan, for all the tremendous work and all the English correspondence and translation with all the participants in order to make this everything run smoothly. And of course to Ms. Ayelet Chazan, one of our staff. And I would like to finish by wishing all of us a successful and fruitful conference. Thank you very much. Ariel? We would like to start by presenting a special suite for the classical guitar based on Spanish and Portuguese themes by the composer and the guitarist Ariel Lazarus. Ariel Lazarus is an Israeli composer, guitarist, and lecturer. His latest international CD, a Hebrew Capriccio, released by European label, and has achieved a critical acclaim by the famous journal Haaretz. Ariel holds a position as music lecturer at the Givat Washington College and the Rimon School of Music. Jerusalem de Sefarad by Ariel Lazarus, please.
Greetings, all honorable professors, for having us. I will just say a few words about a microphone. I will say, but I think I hear me. I will say a few words about the short suite I will play, which I actually prepared especially for this occasion. So it's somewhat of a world premiere. I hope you'll enjoy it. I regarded in this suite my guitar as an echo chamber for my childhood memories. That my memories regarding my grandfather, Abraham Benisso, who was the Spanish and Portuguese cantor at the synagogue La Noga Flamenca in Gibraltar. Now, in my talk later, I will discuss about characteristics of Chazanut and composition, but now it's the music. It's a short suite that is based on themes from the Sephardi, Spanish and Portuguese synagogue. Maybe you will recognize some of them. And the element that brings them together is a connection in most of those songs from the liturgy and the folklore to Jerusalem. Sometimes Jerusalem de Sefarad, yes, Jerusalem of the dreams of the Sephardim, and sometimes nowadays Jerusalem, and there's also a motif from the most famous song, modern song about Jerusalem. I'm sure you will recognize it.
much, Ariel, Lazarus. And now I have the honor and the pleasure to call upon Professor Miguel Tamen, Dean of the School of Arts and Humanities, to deliver his greetings.
Thank you very much. Did you hear me all right? Yes. Well, ladies and gentlemen, after such a wonderful and eloquent welcome, there's little for me to say. Mr. Ambassador, I'm very glad to see you here. I'm very glad to see you all here. I'm Miguel Tamen, Dean of the school. I'm also speaking on behalf of the President of the University, who unfortunately couldn't make it here this morning, and basically to wish you all a very fruitful conference, a very intense, intellectually stimulating conference. It is very much to our benefit that events such as this one take place in places like this, so we're honored and pleased to welcome you all. Of course, also from experience, I know very well the immense amount of work that gets put in basically assembling, putting together these events. So, of course, I'm also very grateful to the organizers for the time and effort. And I just hope the intellectual payback is robust, solid, and challenging. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Tamen. And I would like also to mention the presence, although we are going to have both of them in our special festive dinner, but since they are with us, of course, I'm glad and happy and have the pleasure to present the Israeli ambassador in Portugal, Mr. or Dr. Rafael Gamzu, with us. I have also the pleasure to mention one of the now became one of the famous poets in Israel who won the Israel Prize recently, Erez Biton. And now I have the pleasure to call upon our Vice-rector in Bar-Ilan University, Professor Amnon Albeck, who came specially from Israel to deliver his greetings. Bevakasha.
Good morning. In fact, I came from Prague. It's okay. Good morning, everyone. Jews were living in Portugal already at the 12th century, maybe earlier, but that's where they're registered. Universities came to Lisbon, the first university in the 13th century. So Jews came here about 100, 150 years before the university. But that's to almost everywhere in the world. One of the most famous Portuguese Jews is Don Yitzhak Abarbanel. And I think that if we are looking at modern heroes, so a Polish gentleman, Joshua Schwartz, or something like that, who discovered the converses, and in fact, Shmuel Schwartz. And then there was a military officer, Portuguese, who discovered that he himself was from the conversos, and he converted back to Judaism and became very active in this field. So the history of the Jews in Portugal was rewritten in the 20th century in a very interesting way. And I was here in Portugal some 4 or 5 years ago, and I took a taxi, and the taxi driver saw my kippah, and he immediately asked me if I was Jewish, and he told me, you know, my wife is from the conversos. So this is something that is very lively and very active nowadays in Portugal, which is very interesting. So the history of the Portuguese Jewry is very different than the Spanish one, even though they're connected or held together or treated together, but it's completely different history, completely different story. So this is very interesting. I'm very happy that Bar-Ilan and the Dahan Center took upon themselves to organize this meeting, because Bar-Ilan is known for its third mission in Judaism, and in building bridges between past, present, and future, between Jewish heritage and modern science. So it's just most appropriate that Bar-Ilan and Merkaz Dahan, the Dahan Center, will hold such a conference. I would also like to mention Bentley Center for Jewish Studies, because our second president, Itzhak Bentley, was very much involved in studying and research of Jewish communities all over the world. And I don't know about the University of Lisbon and Porto, but I thank them also for collaborating in this conference. So I am sure that it will be a very interesting, very exciting meeting, very fruitful. I hope that more research will come out from this meeting, new collaborations that will enhance the study of Portuguese and Iberian Jewry. And I wish you all a very interesting conference.
Thank you, Professor Amnon Albeck. And now I have the honor to call upon Professor António Ventura, Director of the History Department, to deliver greetings. Please.
Well, the director of the faculty has spoken, so I'm going to be very economic. Only to welcome you, to wish a very fruitful work during these days, and to tell you it's an honor for the Department of History. And I'm speaking on behalf of the director of the Center of History that is today in Spain in another congress. Good work for everyone, for us too, and be welcome and enjoy this weather. It's not bad in Lisbon. Be welcome. God bless you.
Thank you, Professor Ventura. And the last one, I have a pleasure to call upon Professor Shimon Sharvit, Director of the Academic Ashkelon College. The collaboration with the Ashkelon College started, in matter of fact, 8 years ago. This is not the first international conference that we are holding together. We were already in Bologna, Italy. We were in Macedonia. We were in Tbilisi, in Georgia. And we were in Sao Paulo, in South America, in Brazil. We were in Montreal. We went all over, and we are really sharing our experience and working together, not only outside Israel, but also inside the state of Israel, especially in the college Ashkelon. We are organizing also local conventions and local study days together. So I have really the pleasure to call upon Director Professor Shimon Sharvit.
Ladies and gentlemen, I have the honor to deliver my greetings in this festive opening of the conference on behalf of Ashkelon Academic College, which is one of the largest colleges in Israel. It's already the 7th International Academic Conference of Dahan Center in which my college participates. This time, the college has a large delegation, 6 scholars, including the rector and the director general of the college. This conference covers almost every field of Jewish culture, which is related to Portugal. Indeed, the study of Hebrew and Jewish culture had emerged and flourished on the land of Spain and Portugal for 100 years, and had produced mass of compositions in various fields: Hebrew grammar, lexicography, biblical commentary, philosophy, Kabbalah, literature, prose and poetry, liturgy, Talmud and Halacha, etc. Most of them written in Hebrew. It's appropriate, therefore, that as a member of the Academy of the Hebrew Language in Israel, I will express my greetings and thanks in Hebrew. מוריי ורבותיי, אני מבקש להודות למארגן הראשי לדוקטור שמעון אוחיון, המנהל אני קורא לו הנמרץ של מרכז דהן, לחברי הוועדה המארגנת, ובתוכם כמובן השותפים המארחים, פרופסור חוסה אלברטו טבים מליסבון, ופרופסור אלברה מאה מפורטו, על המלאכה המאומצת שהשקיעו בהכנת הכינוס הזה, על תוכנו ועל התנהלותו. ולא מיותר להזכיר את הגברת אורה, שכולכם הייתם בקשרים איתה, קובלקובסקי ממרכז דהן, שסייעה לוועדה המארגנת לדוקטור אוחיון, וגם עתידה ללוות את הכינוס לכל אורכו. אני מברך פה את כל המשתתפים בברכת כינוס פורה ומחכים, ומאחל לכל הבאים מחוץ למדינה שהייה נעימה על אדמת פורטוגל. תודה רבה.
Thank you, Professor Sharvit. After all the greetings, we are coming now to the main goal, what we call in Hebrew the Tachlis, the main goal that we came for here to this conference. And I would like to call upon Professor Moshe Orfali, the co-chairman of this conference, to present his lecture, his opening lecture, and followed, of course, by Professor Tamen. Moshe Orfali, the former dean of the Faculty of Jewish Studies at Bar-Ilan University, is a professor of Jewish history at the same university, but he holds the Rabbi Moshe Chaim Rao Chair for the Study of Leadership in Times of Crisis, and also is a member of the Directive Board of the Salty Institute for Ladino Studies. He is the author of some books and articles on historical and cultural aspects of Jews and conversos in the Iberian Peninsula and the Sephardi Diaspora. Actually, Professor Orfali is the head of the academic division at Sefarad Academic College. I would like to call upon Professor Moshe Orfali with his opening lecture.
את זה שאני אוכל לקרוא. שאני אוכל להסתכל למטה ולקרוא.
זה בסדר.
כן?
כן.
Thank you, Mr. President of the session, His Excellency the Ambassador of the State of Israel, dear colleagues, distinguished audience, Shalom, bon dia, buenos dias. The use of the term Sefarad is so widespread and extensive that we tend to take its original meaning for granted. Often, it is used for Spain, a term which postdates 1492, the name of the political entity that emerged out of the union of the crowns of Castile and Aragon, to which Muslim Granada conquered in 1492 and the Kingdom of Navarre, annexed in 1512, were subsequently added. Did Sefarad include Portugal, which except for a brief period from 1580s to 1640, remained an independent country? Did the political union of the Kingdom of Aragon and the County of Catalonia from 1137, or the joint reign of Isabel and Fernando over Castile and the Crown of Aragon lead to the formation of a jury distinct from the Jewish communities beyond the borders? Clearly, these late political developments could not have shaped the character of Sephardi Jewry. nor can they explain the term Sefarad, which existed before these events. So, what is Sefarad? And what is Sephardi Jewry? The convenience of the term Sefarad to denote Iberian Jewry as a cultural and religious legacy with medieval world Jewry could be obviously seen if we pay attention to three common and shared components. These components, which in spite of their different political affiliation, afforded the Iberian Jews one cultural heritage. They have had a familiar past, a common present, and share a diasporic future. The sociocultural use of the term Sefarad as Spain goes back to the period coinciding with the emergence of Muslim Spain, or Al-Andalus. The biblical term was used in Babylon during the Gaonic period and elsewhere in the Mediterranean basin. Yonah ibn Jannah used the word Sefarad to refer to Muslim Spain, while Maimonides often mentions Sefarad with Shinar and the Maghreb, that is Morocco. Ibn Jannah, in his Sefer HaShorashim, writes that Sefarad is translated by the Aramaic Targum as Aspamia. As Ibn Jannah did not usually include proper names in his dictionary, he added a sort of apology for including the term Sefarad in his book. Quote, "But we have included it since it is useful, and all the more so the Jews of Sefarad, which is Aspamia according to the general opinion." Moshe ibn Ezra, who lived in a later period, says, "We have a tradition that Sarfat is France and Sefarad is Spain." More precisely, Rabbi David Kimchi states, "The lands of Sefarad, which we call Spania or Spania." From the period of the typhus and following the Reconquista, Sefarad meant a large part of the Iberian Peninsula, which included several political entities directly related to Sephardi history, a Jewish ethnic division that represents communities that originated in the Iberian Peninsula, Portugal and Spain. Thus, in the Sephardi diaspora, the communities of the descendants of the exiled from both countries are called the Hispano-Portuguese communities, or also called the Western Sephardim. Certainly, Jewish populations have existed in the area even before the countries were established. We go back to the Roman provinces of Hispania and Lusitania. While most substantial evidence of Jewish presence in Spain comes from the early Roman era, that from Portugal is later attested by the archaeological excavations in Mertola, revealing a gravestone dating from the 5th century showing the menorah. This means that it must have belonged to the local Jewish community which lived alongside the Visigoths. It's clear that the Jews of both Iberian communities suffered repressions and forced conversions after the changeover from Arianism to Catholicism of the royal Visigoth family under the king Recared in 587. In 711, the Moorish invasion of the Iberian Peninsula changed the lives of the Jews dramatically. In spite of the restriction placed upon them as dhimmis, an historical term referring to non-Muslims living in an Islamic state with legal protection, life under Muslim rule in Iberia was one of the great opportunity in comparison to that under prior Catholic Visigoths, as testified by the influx of Jews from abroad. The Jews throughout the Catholic and Muslim world, the Iberian Peninsula, was seen as a land of relative tolerance and opportunity. Following initial Arab-Berber victories, and especially with the establishment of the Umayyad rule by Abd al-Rahman I in 755, the native Jewish community was joined by Jews from the rest of Europe, as well as from Arab territories, from Morocco to Babylon. Thus, the local Jews found themselves enriched culturally, intellectually, and religiously by the commingling of the well-known Judeo-Arabic culture developed in Spain. In most fields, Spanish Jewry promoted branches of learning initiated early, particularly in the East, achieving excellence during the 2 centuries following the leadership of Hasdai ben Shafrut in the middle of the 10th century. It is due to this relatively long duration that the fusion of Greco-Arabic civilization and Hebrew culture on Iberian soil achieved a claim rarely surpassed. In Talmud and Bible, Hebrew grammar and lexicography, philosophy and poetry, Iberian Jewry produced great masterpieces, and the foundations that were laid in some fields remain sound until this very day. In poetry, the Hebrew poets of Spain produced a unique rich collection which has no equal in Hebrew poetry through the ages, not only in its beauty, but also in its variety of the themes, and particularly in the fusion of holy and profane. The interest of Spanish Jews in medicine, science, and philosophy was another aspect of Jewish culture that became identified with Sefarad. Avraham ibn Ezra was one of the 4 leading mathematicians of the Middle Ages outside India. Avraham Barhia works contributed much to spread of science among the Jews. During the period of the Taifas and the Reconquista, the term Sefarad became more complex. Muslim Spain, in its political fragments, was gradually losing ground to the emerging Hispanic kingdoms of Christian Spain. More and more, the Jews of the Hispanic kingdoms and principalities were introduced to the Judeo-Arabic culture and literature of Al-Andalus. The early migrations of Jews from north to south, however, were eventually reversed as the conditions in the south deteriorated. Although some of the Jewish migrants from the south complained about the primitive conditions and the low level of culture prevailing in the north, in retrospect, we know that the treasures of Andalusian Jewry were to be preserved in the Christian north. Furthermore, what came to be identified as Sefarad was essentially the meeting of the Judeo-Arabic culture of Al-Andalus with the Roman civilization, which was then in its embryonic form, and it includes the geopolitical spaces later called Spain and Portugal. With the Almoravid occupation, and especially with the Almohadic invasion in the middle of the 12th century, Sefarad became more identified with Christian Spain. The Arabic component, however, remained an integral part of the term. The Almohads destroyed Jewish Al-Andalus. The vast majority of the Jewish refugees from Muslim Spain found a haven in the Christian north, particularly in Castile. These refugees joined other Jews who had lived under Christian rule for a generation or so, and had preserved faithfully the Judeo-Arabic tradition of Muslim Spain. Such a refugee was Avraham ibn Daud, who tells us at the end of his Sefer HaKabbalah, book of tradition, how Jewish refugees from the Almohadic south settled under the leadership of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi ben Ezra. According to Ibn Daud, these refugees were the cream of the Jewish people, the descendants of Jewish Granada, whose origins go back to the aristocracy of Jerusalem from the tribes of Judah and Benjamin. Other Andalusian Jews found refuge elsewhere in Muslim or Christian lands. Maimonides' family settled eventually in Egypt, while the Kimchi and Ibn Tibon families settled in Provence. Maimonides is too great a figure for the scope of this lecture, where we want to focus mainly on Portuguese Jewry to provide a general framework for our entire conference. But a word should be said about the Tibonites, who brought about a revolution in the cultural and religious life of Provençal Jewry. The Tibon family brought the traditions of Sefarad from Al-Andalus, which they perpetuated in Provence. Meanwhile, in Castile, and to a lesser extent in the Crown of Aragon, Jews took an active part in the translation of the Greco-Arabic masterpieces into Castilian. A large part of the scientific, medical, philosophical, and theological treatises were translated into Castilian by Jews whose expertise in Arabic and familiarity with the subject matter must have been impressive. Although Hebrew was widely used for halachic, liturgical, and literary purposes, some religious and judicial works were produced in Arabic as late as the 14th century. There is no need to repeat the well-known fact that due to their knowledge of Arabic, Latin, and Provençal, and Romance, besides our other qualities, Jews were employed as interpreters and diplomats in both the crowns of Castile and Aragon, and later in Portugal. While the Judeo-Arabic tradition was becoming gradually a Judeo-Arabic Romance culture, Sepharad was in the process of conquering Provence. I am not referring to the Catalan rule and political involvement in parts of Provence, but to the penetration of Hispano-Jewish influence referred to at the beginnings of this lecture into Judeo-Spanish society. Are you looking for, give me some water? Okay. It is amazing how one Andalusian family, the Tibonites, with several others from Spain, changed the outlook of the character of an entire community, that of Provence. I am using the term Provence in its medieval Jewish sense, and not the political one, of course. Starting with Judah ibn Tivon, 4 generations of translators and scholars provided Provençal Jewry, and in a sense, the whole of Europe with a whole library of books on Jewish philosophy and books on arithmetic, geometry, astronomy, medicine, general philosophy, and other branches of science and thought. Shmuel ibn Tivon, Judah's son, was the translator of various philosophical and scientific works and was largely responsible for the diffusion of Maimonides' philosophy in the West. Several ancient Greek works are known to Europe through their translation from the Hebrew version produced in Spain or Provence. The great demographic mobility in Spain during the high medieval period is also reflected in many of the Jewish families' names in Portugal. In every community throughout the Kingdom of Portugal, we find Jews with names deriving from a place of origin in Spain, such as Navarro, Castellano, Castelao, Toledano, Segoviano, Sevillano, etc. These toponymical names, surnames, kept the original family names and their geographical origin. Some of them survived centuries after the forced baptism of the Jews by King Manuel I in 1497. Yehuda A member of one of these migrant families, the Aben Menir family, was the Rabbi Mor, rabbi of the Jews of Portugal, chief rabbi, of course, and the King Fernando's treasuries and one of his counselors. He was not the only Jew born in the kingdom of Navarre who was important in Portugal. The Navarro family came to this kingdom in the final years of the 13th century under the government of King Dinis. The family lived in Lisbon and in its suburbs, where they have many lands and cultures. The existence of a Rabbi Mor as a chief representative of the Portuguese jury to the crown and as the Jewish Supreme Judge of Appeals reflected the Portuguese crown desire and need for the Jews to have single representative responsible for assessing the tax burden to be levied on the Jews as a whole and dividing that sum among the various communities. He was also to act as the spokesman of the Portuguese jury. Those same functions were later fulfilled in Castile by the Rab de la Corte, and in the future Sephardi diaspora by the chief Sephardi rabbi, the Chacham Bashi in the Ottoman Empire, or in the Rishon LeZion, the spiritual leader of the Sephardi community in the land of Israel from the mid of the 17th century to this day. We don't know when the appointed bearing of the title Rab de la Corte as head of the Castilian jury was first instituted. Only from the 14th century does our information about the holders of this position begin to take concrete time. At the beginning of the 80s of that century, David Negro, Ben Gedalia Ibn Yahya, acted as Rab de la Corte. He moved from Portugal to Castile, and it may well be that brought this tradition and position to Spain. David Negro died in 1385. His successor to the title was Rabbi Chaim of Toledo. He replaced Don Sulema al-Fahar, who lived in Seville and couldn't therefore fulfill the function. Rabbi Meir Alwadez of Segovia did not manage to attain the position. He was apparently martyred following the 1391 persecutions. He was succeeded by Rabbi Avraham ben Benishti from Soria, who died in 1454. He is to be credited with having convened the first assembly of the Castilian community, הוועד הראשון של הקהילות הספרדיות. That means all the representatives of the Castilian communities in a reunion at Valladolid, 1432, drawing up a kind of legislative code in 5 parts of takanot, regulations, which had to find solutions in order to reestablish their communities. These were later applied in the Sephardi diaspora and are well known by the name of Takanot HaMegorashim, the expelled regulations. The post had successors as Rabbis Shammai Lobel of Avila, died before 1472, and Jacob ibn Núñez and Vidal Astori until the dawn of the expulsion, when Abraham Senior assumed the position. In a letter sent from Castile to the Jews of Rome, Abraham Senior was called head of the diaspora, Rosh HaGolah, but it is doubtful whether he deserved this title. He was the last Rab de la Corte of Castilian Jewry. He embraced Christianity on 15 June 1492 in the church of the monastery of Guadalupe. King Fernando himself acted as his godfather and was baptized by the Cardinal of Spain, Pedro González de Mendoza. Similar to Spanish Jewish courtiers who held central positions in the Caliph's court and later in the Hispanic kingdoms, due to their erudition and familiarity with the language of their milieu, we can also find in Portugal the same feature of social elites, especially of other Jewish families from Castile and Navarre, as I said before, who served the royal family of Portugal as traders, bankers, and tax collectors. Of these, perhaps the most important were members of the Abarbanel family, who served Alfonso V, and then Fernando and Isabel in Castile, and Ciudad Toledano, who was in the service of Joao II. Their numbers grew during the 15th century because of social movements against the Jews in Aragon, Navarre, and Castile, from the middle of the 14th century until the end of the 15th century, and the establishment of the Inquisition in Spain. More Castilian Jews and converted families came to Portugal during the last quarter of the century. In Portugal, there was an age of peaceful coexistence that began from the foundation of the Kingdom of Portugal in the 12th century to King Joao II in the 15th century, with important areas of activity in which educated Jews worked. Among these was the art of manuscript, which was quickly transformed into the Hebrew press, mainly producing holy books, but also studies on grammar and philosophy, as in Castile. In the so-called age of scientific discovery, 14th to 15th centuries, the age of the discoveries, in which Jewish mathematicians, cosmographers, and physicians made their contribution to development of the world culture as their Sephardi brothers in Spain. Some Jews occupied prominent places in Portuguese political and economic life. For example, the above-mentioned Isaac Abarbanel, who was the treasurer of King Alfonso V of Portugal. Many others had an active role in Portuguese culture, and they kept their reputation as diplomats and merchants, or rabbis, theologians, jurists, and Sephardi Jewish writers as Rabbi Yosef Caro and Rabbi Abraham Zacuto. That they also came to Castile, to Portugal, but then they became more famous. The Spanish Inquisition and the expulsion decrees of 1492 and the forced conversion in Portugal in 1497 and the creation of the Portuguese Inquisition in 1536 led to the exile of the Sephardi Jewry, which spread throughout the world. However, over generations, the Sephardi exiles kept Castilian or Portuguese as their native language, using it for everyday dealings in their religious services, for translations of the Bible, and their business and socio-religious meetings in their Spanish and Portuguese nogas, or reading the marvelous poems of Portuguese poets as João Pinto Delgado, António Henriques Gomes, and Miguel de Barrios, among others. To conclude, culturally, Sefarad is not only Spain. Catalonia is no more Sephardi than Portugal. Sefarad is a name for a brand of Judaism that emerges as a result of the fusions of Jewish tradition with elements of Greco-Arabic civilization and elements from Romance culture brought by the Reconquista. Sefarad is cultural and religious more than geographical and political. Sefarad was an experiment in Jewish history that was unique in its attempt to create a Jewish Hispano-Portuguese trend that was in many respects contradictory to the exile conditions that dominated Jewish life for centuries. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Professor Orfali. Of course, we are going to give a chance for questions and answers, but this will be after the lecture. I would like to mention also that Professor Orfali is a member, was nominated recently as a member of the Royal Academic Council for History in Madrid, Spain. It's very important to mention. And now I have the honor to introduce Professor José Alberto Tamen, that he is, in matter of fact, the co-chairman for this conference together with Professor Orfali. Professor Tamen will speak on the return to the massacre, Jews living in Lisbon at the time of the 1506 massacre. Professor Tamen is a senior researcher and professor at the Centro de Historia, Faculdade de Letras, Universidad de Lisboa, being the chair of the seminar The Jews in Portugal and in the Diaspora. He is also collaborator member at the Research Center in Evora University. He is the author of 3 books and more than 60 articles published in several languages on the Jews in Portugal and their diaspora. He belongs to the executive committee of Society Sefarad, for which he was re-elected 3 times already, and is a co-editor of Hamsa, Review of Jewish and Muslims Studies. Professor Alberto José Tamen, please. Bevakasha.
Thank you, Dr. Shimon. And Your Excellency, the Ambassador of Israel. No, it's not working. Your Excellency, you are listening now? This video, this one? Okay. Your Excellency, the Ambassador of Israel, dear directors and colleagues, Boker Tov, good morning, bon dia. So my topic is very polemic, return to the massacre, Jews living in Lisbon at the time of 56 massacre. In the already distant year of 1976, Yosef Chaim Yerushalmi wrote his now famous study entitled The Lisbon Massacre of 56 and the Royal Image in the Shevet Yehuda, precisely when he intended to make a translation and edition of the work with the later title written by Shlomo Ibn Verga. The sources consulted by Yerushalmi, notably the work by Ibn Verga, an anonymous contemporary German pamphlet, and also the Chronicle of Dom Manuel by Damião de Góis, and a few other extant documents allowed him to conclude that the fundamental purpose of the perpetrators of the massacre was to liquidate the New Christians. But as New Christians, so the second one, Dom Manuel, a shrewd king. The sociopolitical context that led Dom Manuel I to expel the Jews and also the Moors from Portugal in the late 15th century has already been the subject of careful studies. But the extraordinary preservation in the Arquivo Municipal de Loé in Algarve, south of Portugal, of the reference to other Manuelian documentation on this subject brings more light on the policy of Dom Manuel regarding this complex problem. On December 24, 1496, was presented in Loé Council the text of the letter of King Dom Manuel I given in Moura, in Alentejo, on 14 August of the same year, about the sentenced Spanish conversos who had sought refuge in Portugal and had to leave the kingdom till the end of August 1497. And immediately after, the genitor Fernão Gonçalves presented to the scrivener Gonçalo Queiro the text of the letter of King Manuel, is the second document, on the assets of the Jews and their preachings. This document is symptomatic of the king's intention to transform immediately the Jews into Christians. According to this letter, King Manuel forces the Christians who had acquired property from the Jews who became Christians to turn them over this property from the same price they bought it. Only afterwards, King Manuel specifies that there can be no more preaching among Jews at their synagogues or elsewhere, under sentence of losing their assets and to be publicly beaten. Besides, the king wants to ascertain if some assets of the synagogues were sold, and to whom, and how many, which mean that the Jews were leaving those cold places as was impossible to maintain their religious life. This letter, written in Coruche in 15 December 1496, is not a decree of expulsion, which should have been published in the beginning of that month. We can say that it is more an instrument of its enforcement, trying by the same occasion to ascertain the degree of its execution in what concerns people and their property, and intensify the pressure to convert the Jews. And since there is no negative characterization of Jews and Moors, this means that the claim of the king was to integrate them quickly and without problems. At the local level, the king's policy should have been not to vituperate converts to prevent their integration. However, neither Jews nor Christians behave according to the king's plans. Many Jews try really to run away to other countries where Judaism could be observed, as it is the case of some Italian cities, but mostly the Ottoman Empire and North Africa. Observing how this problem and expected escape from the kingdom, Manuel began to take a series of well-known Machiavellian measures to avoid this hemorrhage of fugitive Jews. On December 21, 1496, he limited the boarding to the Jews who had been granted a royal license. On March 19, 1497, he ordered all children under the age of 14 years old to be taken from the parents and sent to the various towns and cities of the kingdom to be educated as Christians. Later, the young men of 20 years old were also dragged by the guards of the king, baptized and given to people who indoctrinate them. The ports of departure were also restricted to Lisbon and Setúbal, and later the port of the capital was the only one to be used. Later, many Jews staying in the towns were dragged with violence to the churches where they were sprinkled with water of baptism. This happened either in Lisbon or in other lands of the metropolis, and even in Arzila in North Africa, then a Portuguese city. However, this coercive action was not approved by some sectors of the church, and mainly by the Pope Clement VII, as again the principles of the Christian theology, according to which the sacred sacrament of baptism, to be valid, should be taken by free will. In fact, if these reactions of some sectors of the Church and the Pope were taken a posteriori, mostly in the years 30 of the 16th century, it seems by the sequence of the events that Dom Manuel avoided to improve these hard measures, precisely because it could provoke a drastic attitude of those. but also probably due to the humanistic and messianic environment that it was consolidated in his reign and centered in his person. By the opposite, it is well known that Dom Manuel I insisted in a politic of integration of the Cristãos Novos, being very careful concerning this new group officially belonging to the Christian society, and very strict concerning the traditional sectors of the Christian society that did not behave according to his plans. We know that concerning the conversos, Dom Manuel decreed on May 30, 1497, that the new Christians could not be interrogated for apostasy for 20 years. And on March 1552, ordered a provision to put an end to the insolence of certain people who misused the Marrano term applied to new Christians. You can see here, and because some people who called the new Christians Marrano did not have a criminal sentence, to avoid this, we defend that no one should call Marrano or Marrana to those who become Christians, on pain of whoever does otherwise, if he is a square or upwards, must pay for each time he used these terms 2 million reais to the party called Marrano, etc., etc. These royal measures reveal that old Christians continue to look upon the new Christians with suspicion and reluctance, even because of the precariousness of their level of conversion, which was considered to be imperfect, and because they know that they were born as Jews and that the new faith could not be assimilated in so short time. Briefly, many Christians of non-Jewish origin regarding the Cristãos Novos, pressed by the king to this condition as secret Jews, suspected of anti-Christian attitudes and machinations as revenge for their new condition. These are undoubtedly some of the primary factors that led to the notorious massacre of 56 began in the church of the convent of São Domingos in Lisbon. So, Lisbon Jews during the massacre. However, in Lisbon, there was another reality not mentioned by Yerushalmi that perhaps fueled the massacre. The existence of Jews, which therefore appoints to a royal authorization to live as such, heaven in 56, living in the big or old Jewish quarter, and also in the little or coin Jewry, as neighbors of those who had converted and become new Christians. In fact, we can observe this phenomenon in other places beside Lisbon, and respecting to other expelled minority, the Moors. And interesting, the same happened with the Jews. In fact, analyzing the so-called Livros de Tombo dos Bens e Direitos Reais de Lisboa, book of the royal properties and rights in Lisbon and its neighborhood, better known as Livro de Próprios, 9 books remaining in the National Archives of Torro do Tombo nearby, and relating to the period from 1421 to 58, we can observe the existence of people maintaining the Jewish identity in the old Jewish settlement of Lisbon, the so-called Judiarias, as late as 56, the year of the famous massacre of the New Christians. Unfortunately, we don't know what has happened also in the year 58, because due to its poor state of conservation, the book concerning this year does not come to the reading room. Analyzing these books, we can see the permanence of Jews living in their old neighbor, along with others, including relatives who have converted, and this could be attested since 1498. For this year, in the small Jewish quarter or the Moeda, you can see there at yellow, Giuseppe Catarribas brings houses that used to bring Giuseppe Catalan, but belong to Abraham Al-Male, rabbi from the Jewish quarter of Alfama. Only the owner changed his identity, become now the Christian Lopo de Figueiredo. This case is repeated in many examples, but in other cases conversion is observed, as is in the case of an Alfonso Alves, who was formerly called Crudo, or a Vicente Afonso, who was called Cofem, but remain as tenants of their houses in their new religious status of Christians. In the old Jewish quarter of Lisbon, the true soul of the commune, of the capital, the situation is ever more exciting. Just as the little Jewish quarter, there are Jews who go on renting houses that were previously leased to other Jews, which leads to assume that these last immigrated. This is the case of Samuel Abravanel, who brings houses where Judas the Pedroneiro used to live. The powerful Abravanel also seems to be well settled in Lisbon. According to the same book, an Abravanel receives in rent the houses that were the hospital of Salomão Negro, where Moisés Latam lived. Very interesting, between 52 and 53, Bernardo Amarillo has leased in the old Jewish quarter some houses that were synagogue before, which means that Jews continue to live there and dispense its existence. But still in these years, the existence of conversos living in the same neighborhood along with the Jews is already confirmed. This is the case of Afonso Álvares, formerly known as Crudo, or of Simão Álvares, whose previous name was Abraão Adaroc, or Vasco Afonso, formerly known as Cofem. But the most remarkable news on this restrained permanence of people with Jewish identity is the fact that in 52-53, Moisés de León leased some houses forever, in what had been the Juderia Grande, and was now designated, fully marking the integration in the Christian universe as Vila Nova, the new quarter. This is when there were other Jews and conversos living together in the same place. Furthermore, the book corresponding to the year of the massacre has been saved and can be consulted. According to the information in this book, there was an increase in the number of Christians renting houses in the old Jewish quarters of Lisbon. Of course, mostly, probably new Christians, as Tomé Lopes before Isaac. But Jews were still present there. For example, in the small Jewish quarter, Judas Cofém still brings the balcony of Torre das Pombas, where the son of Judas Levi lived before. In the Juderia Grande, the portrait is similar. The Hassan of the synagogue of the women, Samuel Adida, it was called now as Gonçalves Lopes. And the woman of Salmão Abed finally adopted the Christian religion, changing her name as Margarida Gomes. But Moisés de León still rent there some houses forever. And Abraão Rico and Master Moisés Azrim aided form a society to rent some houses in the cellar of Lisbon Great Jewish Quarter. Again, why did King Dom Manuel allow this permanence till so late? We can advance the hypothesis that after the episodes of first baptized in 1497, the king invested in a politic of integration by constraint and influence, but without the use of violence. On the one hand, as we have already advanced, the continuation of a policy of violence could lead to a confrontation with the church, as we have seen from the reaction a posteriori of some members of this one and the Pope himself. On the other hand, it is also notorious that King Manuel intended a dilution of the sector of the population in the Christian social and religious field of the kingdom, which is denoted in the measures conducive to its safeguarded, such as non-inquiry of their religious beliefs and the punishment of their exclusion through reproach. Still, in this context, we must take into account the evolution of the Manuelian imperial project, to use the designation of Luís Filipe Tomás, in which Dom Manuel emerged as a sort of primordial messianic figure, as emperor of an universal Christian empire, the Portuguese Empire. In this context, the inclusion of all the Christians of his kingdom at an expansionist level was not compatible with an exclusive determinant of any sector of the Christian folk, or at least it was not desirable. In fact, this religious unification of all the social groups, together with the success of the discoveries and conquests, were considered in the millenarian ideology of Dom Manuel kingdom a kind of signs and prelude, proving the God's election of Portugal, ruling by his determinate emperor in the mankind's Christian unity. In these millenarian plans, it should be suitable that all the Christians should be true Christians. It means Christians believer and not Christians by force. Christians believers should be necessarily deeply involved in the messianic Manuelian plans as the apostles of Christ, a strong image used by many conversos themselves as a means of defense, and also by their defenders, such as Father António Vieira. E o nome de Cristão Novo, que hoje é tão afrontoso, será como de céu novo e terra nova, com que Deus há de renovar o mundo. This is almost sure the reason why Dom Manuel allowed the permanence of Jews living in the whole Jewish quarters, now officially Christian neighborhoods, along with the other converted kinsmen and other Christians. The king thought and longed for that without their socio-religious equipments, such as the synagogues, and due to the surrounding social and religious pressure, the remaining Jews should capitulate on the lofty throne of the Christian faith, thus leading in this way the first steps of the imperial messianism. What we must now question is whether the Christian population lived this experience in everyday life at the same vision of the king. The most known massacre of Lisbon proves the opposite. In fact, about 2,000 persons were killed during the 3 days of the massacre that took place in Lisbon since 19 April 56. It means only 9 years after the general expulsion of the Jews from Portugal. This atrocity began in the church of São Domingos. A gleam left a crucifix and the head of a statue of the Virgin Mary, and soon the people present shouted, "Miracle!" A new Christian present had the unfortunate idea of arguing that it was merely a reflection of a candle, and was soon accused of being a Jew, dead and cheated on the spot. Two Dominican friars waving crucifix excited the people, shouting, "Heresy, heresy, destroy these abominable people." And from there, the situation became explosive and uncontrolled. People start to kill all conversos inside and outside the church, and bands of evil doers plundered the houses, throwing women and children from the windows and lighting fires which burn dead and alive. To exacerbate the situation, sailors from the Hanseatic League, who then passed through Lisbon, participated in the looting and the massacre. In fact, both New Christians and Old Christians died. Among them, the conversos João Rodrigues Mascarenhas, a royal tax collector and one of the healthiest men in Lisbon. Dom Manuel, which was away from Lisbon, reacted with energy, what proves that the situation was pernicious to his parents. The evildoers were sentenced to death and confiscation of property. The passive accomplices were also punished, and the city of Lisbon was penalized by the abolition of his privilege. As referred before, the main sources concerning this episode are the Crónica de Dom Manuel by Damião de Góis, the Shebeti el-Huda from Shlomo ibn Verga, and the anonymous account by a German that it was a testimony of the event. In fact, neither Damião de Góis nor Shlomo ibn Verga were direct testimonies. The first at only 4 years old when this happened, and Ibn Verga, although in Portugal in 56, was not in Lisbon. Besides to these 3 main sources, there are references in other accounts, including the direct testimony of the refugee convert in Saloniki, Isaac ibn Faraj. Another of these sources is the Manuscript Chronicles dos Reis de Portugal e Sumários de Suas Vidas, attributed to the chronicle Gaspar Correia. According to this manuscript, the massacre coincided with an outbreak of plague that struck Lisbon, and the people gathered in the church of São Domingos seeking spiritual comfort, which may explain the magnitude of the attitude of revulsion by the comment of the New Christian. Still, according to this manuscript, the Dominicans only made their intervention on the 3rd and last day of the massacre. Tuesday, a Dominican left the monastery of São Domingos, assisted by 2 other brothers, with a wooden cross in his hands, and wandered around Lisbon, saying, "Here, children, by the faith of Jesus Christ, do not remain any of these Jews." This incitement provoked more gatherings of evildoers. So, if in these narratives there is no direct references to free Jews living in the old Jewish quarters, the immediate identification of New Christians with Jews is suspect. As also suspect is the reference of Gaspar Correia in Crônicas de Dom Manuel e Dom João III, when the chronicle mentions the prophecy of a paralyzed young girl, and she referred that in Portugal the New Christians maintain some secret synagogues. Also interesting is the report of Ibn Verga that before the massacre some Marranos were incarcerated as accused to celebrate all the rites of Passover. If they were released by king's order, this brought a feeling of general resentment against the conversos. If Yerushalmi, based on the text of the Spanish chronicle Andrés Bernaldez, also see in this massacre a reaction against the generalized fiscal policy imposed by Dom Manuel, and those executors were some conversos, like Mascarenhas, as they had been before as Jews, the author also remarks the phenomenon that all the testimonies, Christian and Jews, considered them as simple Jews. The massacre of 56 was thus a massacre of Jews, and the details were less important than the overall configuration, say Yerushalmi. We can ask how much of these concise and agglutinating views does not derive from the fact that there was a common knowledge that many Christians lived with their Jewish parents in the same old Jewish quarters, all being understood as Jews as a whole. And we also wondered to what extent the knowledge of this reality did not exacerbate the moods of those who did not agree with Dom Manuel's plan for a peaceful integration of the Jews into the Christian society, making the massacre a kind of intended extermination. Thank you very much.
Professor Albeck, please stay. We want to ask him. Thank you very much, Professor Alberto Tavim. Now I would like to call Professor Moshe Orfali, and I want to allow a few questions before we are going out for a... Well, okay. I think we should take the mic to make sure, because we have also the translation. Everybody is taking a tramp in it. Professor Dov Stoshinsky, please.
Thank you very much. Very quickly, just to add to, first of all, to Professor Orfali's lecture, to remind just the general public that even among the Portuguese until very late, to speak about Spain, España included Portugal. If you look at the João de Barros, for instance, for him, España was like Italy at that moment, that is divided political country, but sharing the same origin and perhaps an utopian future. And then concerning José Alberto Tavim, I will say path-breaking lecture. This possibility you are mentioning is going to change much of what we used to teach and say regarding both the Lisbon massacre but the conversion. However, perhaps we still, if I understood you well, I have to read carefully the documentation. We have still to be sure that we are speaking about open professing Jews at that time. And just very briefly for several reasons. One is that in Rome, as you know, there was a huge debate of people within the papacy who were against the mass conversion of the Jews in Portugal, whereas there were others which they supported it coming from the Portuguese side. And in these debates, at least myself, I didn't find any defense on the part of the Portuguese side saying, look, it's true, many of the Jews were converted by force, but there were others who were not. And you know, it will be natural to find like that, and just finally, to look at these people by the rioters as Jews is quite natural, because you know, even if the king they try to integrate them, it's clear that for the mob they are still Jews. And just a suggestion, perhaps, I don't know, you know the concerning perhaps houses and places, it has more difficulty to perhaps to transform the name of the Jewish ownership into the name of a new Christian, very new ownerships in those kind of dealings. Perhaps it's just a juridical reminiscence, but this is only a possibility, no more than that. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor Stoshinsky. I would like also to give the opportunity to others, but make sure that you can make a comment, but try to make a short comment.
I can't.
Mainly,
I can't.
Yeah, I understood. But of course, we want to allow a few questions. Please present yourself, give him the mic, and
I'm sorry.
oh, first lady. Okay, very good.
Yes.
Again, say your name, please.
Ariel.
And the university.
University of Texas at Austin.
Texas. Austin. Texas.
I just very briefly want to ask Moshe and thank you for your talk about the term as commentators, looking at the biblical term. What do they say about it? It's a question I haven't asked, but it seems like an obvious place to start. What did medieval Spanish Jewish commentators say about the biblical term itself? And yes, it certainly has a cultural aspect, but it has other aspects as well. And I think it does surely have a geographical aspect. And of course, it also has the aspect of the prayer rites, which, as far as I know, is something that's shared by all Jews in the Iberian Peninsula. So I just wanted to point out that there are a variety of aspects, but also to ask about the usage. How is the term used in rabbinic literature? What can we learn from the way the term itself is used?
Thank you very much. You want to respond to just you collect and then okay, I'll collect them. Please pass the mic to Professor Banon.
I want to refer to the conclusion of Moshe Orfali. You are right, Sefarad is not a geographical localization or concept. It's a cultural concept, and I would say it's an extraterritorial concept. And it is important for us in Israel because we are the descendant of the Golei Sfarad, and they call us Mizrahim. They call us Mizrahim. We are, and we have to fight and to be recognized as the descendant of Sefarad.
Thank you. Take another lady. Very good. Now, yeah. Oh,
discrimination of men.
Okay, Professor.
To Moshe Orfali, there's the concept of the Portuguese nation, which essentially originally was a Jewish concept. But earlier, and I would say that most of the Portuguese essentially came from Ashkelon and Andalusian origin earlier. But how much do you find any traces of actual Portuguese identity, any rooted Portuguese identity among Portuguese Jews of the Western side? So in other words, are there rare cases where you found where it actually lived here in Portugal for generations?
Okay, thank you, Professor Cruz.
Actually, just two short comments about 1506. If I remember correctly, very vaguely, at least one Portuguese source which says that Christians hid Jews during the expulsion. Those 3 or 4 days in Lisbon, they hid them in their houses. Christians hid Jews. In other words, there might have been many Jews, or some Jews, who did not go through the conversion. So I don't remember which is the source, but this one. About Sefarad, Portugal, and Spain. We should keep in mind, first of all, that until the end, the scholars, or even the greatest rabbis in Lisbon, which was the main community, perhaps second to none in the entire Iberian Peninsula, maybe second to Samora, but not more than it was the best, the most solid community. in Nigeria, they still consider, they went to study in Spain. Ohayon, for example, the greatest one of them in the 15th century, and he calls himself Sephardi, Rabbi Yosef, Sephardi, מליסבון אשר לקצה המערב. From Lisbon to Sephardi. That's it all. Thank you.
Okay, maybe we'll have another one more, and that's it. Okay, Professor Orfali, please.
First of all, to Professor Stuczynski. Professor Stuczynski, of course I agree with the conception of both countries as cultural unified, but trying to also make a connection to other questions. The Portuguese identity in many countries in Europe in the 16th, 17th centuries was a synonym of being Jewish. When you say in Italy or other places, is Portuguese, they are making allusion to commerciants or bankers that are Jews. So the topographical place is related directly to Jews. This is very interesting that it was not separated. Now I'm going to Miriam's question. The term is a biblical term. It appears in the book of Obadiah 20. There is only one chapter in Obadiah, but the verse 20, Sefarad and Tzarfat, both places appear there. And there is a great discussion between researchers. Where is it? Normally today, Sefarad is identified with Tarshish, a place close to Elad, 30 kilometers from Elad or something like that. But it doesn't separate the idea that Sefarad, as also the Latinians in medieval Latin, thought that this is the end of the West, the corner, and the Talmudists began with that, but they wanted to say a place very, very far away. They say, oh, this is in Aspamia. Or when we want to say in Hebrew something that is very allusional, we say, Halomot be'Aspamia. We are taking it from the Talmud, and just from the definition of the Sofa Marav, okay, Sofa Olam, the end of the world. But back into the medieval idea, concept, I mentioned in my lecture that David Kimchi said explicitly that Tzarfat is Tzarfat and Sefarad is Spania, Hispania. We take the Roman definition of the part of Spain named by the Romans. So there was the idea that this definition is, that place biblical is also in the Iberian Peninsula. This is Kimchi, but there are others. I just put one because I didn't want to make a discussion on the origin of the term and its significance, but to show the erasement of borders. People came from Castile to Portugal, and they went back to Spain. And that's why I make the mixture of the ideas, as Professor Gross said, because they felt their lineage, I am Sephardi, right? But it doesn't take the honor of people like Zacuto that gave his greetings to the king and then gave his service. Or other refugees, even they were expelled 5 years then. So we have, what I wanted to stress here is that we have a same culture, and most of all the innovation is that the roots of this culture is the mixture of Judeo-Arabic tradition with the Romans, that was the contribution. And that's what makes the mixture on Mizrahim and Sephardim, they don't understand. But this is the same thing, because it is clear that in Israel a Kurdish or a Persian, we can define him as Sephardi. But those who are from Arabic culture, and I mean to the Maghreb and the Ottoman Empire, they are pure Sephardis by definition. Even we have Sefarad Vedota Mizrah all the time discussing this point. But thank you for the opportunity to explain it here in public. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Professor Tamen, please.
Concerning Professor Suzinski, as I said, this phenomenon don't happen so in Lisbon. I saw in other places, so it's not a problem of his documents. Also, our documents show that in other places, as Guitarist, so in Portugal, mostly the older people remains, but they lose their legal status. It means most of the saints they converted, and in this case, the old mother remained with the Jewish identity because she didn't want to convert, but the king allows that she remains with this identity is there. No theory. In the case of Lisbon, to me, it is extraordinary. I have to say that I'm very grateful to a colleague, medievalists, that showed me these documents, because sometimes the historians from the early modern period, they are separate from the others. And she showed me these extraordinary documents. But I know that you have shown me, for example, in the introduction of the book of Samuel Ushko, a very wonderful study. He shows the cases of some Jews that in this period they went to Egypt, and there is some documents in the Gerizal Cairo concerning these people that immigrated to Rome. But to me it was a surprise. This is why I want to transmit this here. Also many people remain with the Jewish status and with the right to remain with the Jewish status and have their own houses, sometimes the houses of the people that really immigrate, or some Jews that don't want to remain here. I don't know what is happening with the heads of these people, because this is dry documents, it's taxes. So it is really true. It's a tax book. The king wants to know who lives in their houses to pay the taxes. So it's really correct documents. And we separate here in the documentation, you can see that they separate conversos and Jews. So it is explicit that sometimes they give also the two names, the Jewish name and the name of the people as convert. So also to answer to you, to me, I know that some people remain for several reasons, because they don't want to leave, or they could not leave, or they want really to convert to Christianity. But the remaining of these people still so late as 55, as I said, I could not read the book of 58 because they don't allow me. It's in a very poor state. So this is the books that remain from this period. It was a surprise to me. And as I stress, it proves maybe the change of the policy of government, of immigration, and this can be compared with other documents that we publish to avoid that these people could be arrested, what don't happen here because of terrorists.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you, Professor José Alberto Tamen. And thanks to Professor Moshe Orfali, both, in matter of fact, co-chair of this conference. Thank you all. Now, we are going out for a short break, for coffee break, and then we are going to have parallel sessions, 4 sessions, 2 on this floor and another 2 downstairs. So follow the list and the names of the halls also in your program. Thank you very much.